Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have another dump and go crockpot dinners video for you. So these are gonna be some super easy and budget friendly crockpot dinners. I try to get a new one of these videos out every couple of weeks where I share a bunch more crockpot dinners just to make your life a little bit easier, especially as we get into this super busy time of year. If you're new here and you don't want to miss out on any more of these crockpot videos, definitely make sure you are subscribed. I also post a lot of what's for dinners, grocery hauls, meal prep, and other food related content. So if that is something you're interested in, make sure you are subscribed. And let's go ahead and get into today's crockpot video. For this first dinner, I'm making a lasagna soup, which is definitely one of our favorites. I am starting off by sauteing up my carrots and my onion. So I have a couple of carrots here that I just diced up, and then I also have about half of a large onion that I also diced up. Now, like I said, I'm sauteing these in some olive oil, but if you want to save on the dishes, you can definitely just soften them in your microwave a little bit before adding them to your soup. I just always like to pre-soften some of my veggies just to make sure that they really get nice and soft and cooked all the way through. Now heading over to my crock pot, I'm just spraying it with a little bit of olive oil so nothing sticks. And then I'm adding in 1 jar of spaghetti sauce. I just chose to use the traditional kind, but you can go ahead and use whatever you have on hand or whatever is your favorite. And then I'm adding in 1 can of some mushrooms, as well as about half a pound of some cooked up sausage that I had in the fridge. And then of course I'm gonna add in all of those cooked veggies right into my pot. Now for the liquid in this recipe, I'm adding in about 4 cups of chicken broth, but you could definitely also use veggie broth if that's what you have on hand. So I just added that right in there. I mixed up some bouillon with some water, and then I'm also adding in 1 can of petite diced tomatoes for some extra flavor. Now for seasonings, they're pretty simple. I did about 1 teaspoon of garlic powder and Italian seasoning, and then a half a teaspoon each of salt, pepper, as well as some onion powder. And I thought the flavors were really good with this amount of seasoning. I cooked this on high for about 4 hours. Once it was completely done cooking, I'm adding in the lasagna noodles. This is about half a box of lasagna noodles, so I just cooked these up according to the directions on the back of the box. They turned out really good. They didn't get soggy at all. Just make sure to cook them until they are all the way cooked through. And then I added in probably about a cup of mozzarella cheese. You could also add this later on, but I really like to have all of that cheese really nice and melted into the soup, but you could definitely add it on top of your soup as well. This was definitely one of our favorites. It was super warm and cozy for a nice cold day. For this next recipe, I'm making some cracked chicken sandwiches. So I'm just using my medium crock pot for this one. I'm spraying it with a little bit of olive oil, and then I'm adding in 2 chicken breasts. You can definitely use 3 though. My chicken breasts were absolutely huge, so I only needed 2 of them. And then you're just gonna sprinkle on 1 package of ranch seasoning mix. I usually will use the Great Value brand or the Aldi brand. And then you're just gonna add a block of cream cheese right on top. You're gonna cook this on high for about 4 to 5 hours. Once it's all done, you're just going to shred it up either with 2 forks, or you can also use a hand mixer here, but just get all of that chicken shredded up. I always like to add my bacon towards the end of the cooking time, so I'm just adding in 1 package of these real bacon pieces, but you can definitely cook up your own too if you want to do it that way. And then I'm also adding in 1 cup of some cheddar cheese. I like to stir all of this together and just let it all melt, let all the flavors sit for about 10 minutes before serving, and it turns out absolutely delicious. This is definitely one of our favorite recipes. I usually will serve it on some buns, but I've also done wraps before, or you can even eat this chicken plain. It has a ton of flavor. I think you guys are really gonna like this recipe. For this next dinner, I am making some Philly cheesesteak subs. I actually got this recipe from my sister, so I am going to go ahead and brown my chuck roast on both sides. So I'm just heating up some vegetable oil and then adding that chuck roast right in there. I did make sure to salt and pepper both sides of this chuck roast really well, and then I browned up both sides of it. I probably let it cook for about 5 to 6 minutes on each side, just until it got a really nice crusty layer. I'm sure you could probably get away with skipping this step, but I decided to make sure to get it done. Once I had that chuck roast all browned up, I'm just spraying my crock pot, and then I'm adding in 1 can of this French onion condensed soup. This is the first time I've ever used this in a recipe, and it was really good. It had a ton of flavor. And then I'm also adding in about 1.5 cups of beef broth. I added in some extra broth because I did not add the beer that the recipe called for. And then you're gonna need 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. I just gave that a quick stir together before adding in my chuck roast. Now I'm just going to cover this up, cook it on low for about 8 hours, and then during that last hour of cooking, I am adding in my 1 onion that is all sliced up and ready to go, and then I'm also adding in a bell pepper. I decided to add in a sweet bell pepper just because that's our family favorite, so I'm just slicing that up as well. Now here is where I'm adding in all of the peppers and the onions, and then I also did decide to add in 1 can of mushrooms. I believe the recipe called for fresh mushrooms actually, but I just decided to add in the can of them because it's a little bit easier, and that's actually what our family prefers. So I just added all of this in there, and I cooked it on high for about 1 hour once all of the veggies were added in there. Just before serving, I am toasting up some sub rolls. I always get mine at Walmart. They're really affordable. I think I paid about $3 for this bag of them, and they also freeze really well, so I'm just getting all of those sliced up. Now my little helper snuck into the kitchen and stole a sub roll. This is the part that I usually edit out of my videos, but yes, my little helper always is getting into things. So now I'm adding on my melted butter, and I'm just going to toast these up in the oven. You could also throw them in your air fryer, or if you want to just make things really simple, you could honestly skip this step, but I definitely do think it added a little bit of flavor. So I'm just adding the butter on there before throwing them in the oven. While those sub buns are toasting up, I'm just cutting up my chuck roast. The recipe said to cut against the grain. I'm just honestly cutting it up into some pretty small pieces. I definitely did not want large chunks of meat in our sandwiches, so I'm just making sure that this is really well sliced up. Now I'm just adding that chuck roast right back into my crock pot. I just let this sit until the sub rolls were all done cooking. This meat honestly had a ton of really good flavor. Even without the beer added in there and just having the broth, it still had a ton of flavor. So I definitely would recommend this recipe. It had very good flavor. I'm just adding a really good amount of this meat mixture right into my sub rolls once those are toasted up. I have to say this is a very hearty dinner. These were very filling. Definitely recommend this recipe. My husband loved it. My brother was here and he also really enjoyed it. And it was very filling. You could definitely feed a crowd with this one. We had a ton of leftovers and it was a really great option with the meat having a ton of flavor. I did also add in some cheese. The recipe actually said to use Cheese Whiz, or that's what they recommended anyway, but I did not have any Cheese Whiz. I never really buy that. So I just decided to top it with some shredded cheese, and then I threw this under the broiler for just a couple of minutes just to really brown up that cheese and get it nice and melted. But this was honestly a really good dinner. We really enjoyed this one, and it was also very easy with pretty minimal ingredients. For this next recipe, I'm making a chicken and wild rice soup, which is super cozy and perfect for this time of year. So I'm just adding in my oil just to make sure nothing sticks. And then of course I'm gonna add in my chicken. So I just used one large chicken breast, but you can definitely add in another one. Mine was just really huge, so I didn't feel the need to. And then I'm adding in a couple cups of carrots, as well as a couple stalks of celery. And then of course I'm going to add in one large onion in there as well. And then for the mushrooms, I just decided to add in 1 can right into my pot. And then I'm also adding in 1 can of cream of mushroom soup. For the broth here, I only added in about 4 cups of chicken broth. I honestly should have added in closer to 6 cups. I ended up having to add in a little bit more later on, and it turned out just fine, but I would say add about 6 cups of broth at this time. For the rice, I'm adding in about half a cup of brown rice and half a cup of wild rice. This is uncooked rice. I did make sure to give it a good rinse before adding it into my pot, but definitely make sure that it is not cooked before you add it in there. And then I'm adding in my seasonings. I just used about 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, about a teaspoon of salt, teaspoon of oregano, teaspoon of garlic powder, and then you can just give that a good stir together. I just cooked this on high for about 4 to 5 hours, and that turned out absolutely perfect. Once my soup was all done cooking, I'm just making a roux to make it really nice and creamy. So I melted about a couple tablespoons of butter, and then I added in half a cup of flour, and I'm just letting this cook up for a minute or so before adding in my milk. So for the milk, you're going to want 2 cups of milk, and you're just going to kind of gradually whisk that in there. You definitely want to do it gradually. It turns out a lot better that way, but this should thicken up, and then you're gonna add this right into your soup. While that roux is thickening up, you can go ahead and cut up your chicken. You can also shred this if you want it that way. I've done it both ways and it turns out great every time, but I just decided to cut mine up into some pretty small pieces on this day. I just really felt like having cubes of chicken in my soup, so that is what I'm doing here. As you can see here, I have a very thick soup, which is why I said go ahead and add in the extra broth at the beginning. I only added in the 4 cups, so it ended up being a very thick soup, but some people actually really like their soup thick, so if you like it thicker, you can add a little bit less broth like I did, but I did end up adding in some extra milk and some extra broth, and it turned out absolutely delicious. So here I'm just mixing in that roux and the chopped up chicken, and then like I said, it was just too thick, so I added in a little splash of milk as well as some chicken broth, and that thinned it up to a really good consistency. This soup honestly turned out really good. It was very hearty, it was very creamy, and it was also a very good budget-friendly option because, as you know, rice is very cheap, chicken is very cheap, and I only used 1 chicken breast, and I didn't even feel like it was lacking chicken here. So definitely a really good recipe if you're on a budget. You can add a little bit of extra salt and pepper at the end just to make sure it has a ton of flavor. But this was a really good soup recipe. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. For this next dinner, I'm making some ranch pork chops with some potatoes in the crock pot. So this is a really good complete meal. Of course, you're gonna want to spray your crock pot, and then you're just gonna add your pork chops right in there. I used about 5 of them for this recipe, which is about half a package from what I get at the store. And these are some really thick cut pork chops. I think they turn out really good for this recipe when you use the thicker ones. So I'm just adding all of those right in there, and then I'm making sure to salt and pepper them really well for tons of flavor. I'm going to be adding in a packet of ranch seasoning, but I did decide to add in some extra garlic powder as well. And now here is that ranch seasoning that I was talking about. So I added in about half a packet to the pork chops, and then the other half the packet is going to go onto these potatoes. So I added in about 4 or 5 russet potatoes here. I added in the garlic powder, and then of course I'm topping it with that ranch seasoning mix for tons of extra flavor. For the liquid in this recipe, you're going to want about a cup of some chicken broth just to make sure everything stays nice and moist. And then I did also add in some pats of butter. I probably added in like 3 tablespoons or so, and it definitely added in a lot of extra flavor. I just cooked this on high for about 4 hours. This is a really easy one with minimal ingredients that I think your family will really enjoy. Alright guys, that is going to wrap up this dump and go crock pot video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button if you are not already. I would love to have you over on my channel. Like I mentioned before, I do post a new dump and go crock pot video every couple of weeks, so definitely make sure you're subscribed, and I will catch you all in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.
As a young girl, it feels we're mine. We played hide and seek for hours, raised our shadows among the pines. So offshore, playful and free, without a care.